You're listening to Systemic Era Podcast. The failure was designed.
Inside Trump's blueprint for retribution, how states are fighting a White House power grab, based on an article by Jonathan Schwarman, State Time. Federalism is not the problem. Trump's coercion is. What this story actually shows. The article frames the moment as a grand constitutional stress test, but the power relationship is simpler than that. Donald Trump controls the executive branch, and he is using federal agencies, federal money, and the threat of federal force to pressure states, punish enemies, and push his political aims. That is not an abstract debate over federalism. It is a presidential attempt to turn the machinery of government into a tool of personal rule. The reporting does capture one real counterforce. Democratic states are building legal defenses, from limits on law enforcement masking to protections around election systems and polling places. That resistance matters. But the central fact remains unchanged. The damage is being driven from the White House. The decision maker is clear. The source does something that happens far too often in political coverage. It dilutes agency into constitutional atmosphere. It talks about institutions fraying and a breaking point, as if the system were simply wearing thin on its own. That is misdirection. Trump is the one who chose to weaponize executive power, as the article notes, by treating federal dollars as leverage and trying to assert control over state-run elections. He is the one whose administration will not even rule out sending agents or troops to the polls, a level of intimidation that should be treated as a democratic emergency, not a procedural controversy. The responsibility is not distributed evenly across Washington. It sits with the administration that is escalating. States are doing what they must. The most useful part of the article are the examples of state-level defense. California limiting federal access to voter lists without a court order. New Mexico moving to prohibit troops at polling places. States restricting masking by law enforcement in response to ICE, Border Patrol, and other federal agents. That is not symbolism. It is self-protection. The article quotes Democrats saying state governments have to protect people from federal overreach, and that is exactly right. When the federal government acts like a coercive instrument, states become the immediate line of defense. The problem is not that states are rebalancing power in the abstract. The problem is that they are being forced to build barricades against an aggressive presidency. ICE is not a reform project. The source mentions the widespread use of masks via ICE and the backlash it has produced. That should not be softened into a policy discussion about training or oversight. ICE is a secret policing apparatus that normalizes fear, anonymity, and state violence against immigrants and communities around them. The correct democratic response is abolition, not tinkering. Mask restrictions, limits on federal access, and state resistance are all defensive measures against an agency that functions as an arm of intimidation. The article's language of aggressive pursuit understates what is happening. Immigration enforcement under this model is not merely harsh. It is deliberately designed to cow communities and expand executive reach. The constitutional theater is convenient. A lot of the quoted Republican commentary is dressed up as institutional seriousness, calls for a convention of the states, complaints that Congress lacks courage, nostalgia for a smaller federal government, claims that states should reclaim authority from Washington. Some of that is old conservative anti-government boilerplate. Some of it is opportunism. And some of it is a vehicle for wealthy interests to force structural change through a process the Constitution barely sketches out. The article notes that critics fear a runaway convention for good reason. That fear is not paranoia. It is a sober reading of how little control exists once a convention is underway. What matters politically is this: while Republicans talk about constitutional rebalancing, the present crisis is being created by an executive who already believes the presidency should dominate the states. The convention talk is a sideshow unless it confronts that reality directly. The real pattern. The larger pattern is authoritarian normalization through federal power. A president punishes states, threatens elections, deploys agents as a presence of intimidation, and treats public money as a loyalty instrument. Then the press converts that into a civics lesson about federalism in distress. That framing flatters the abuse. It makes deliberate coercion sound like institutional drift. The Democratic coalition's job is not to pretend the two parties are equally implicated. Democrats in state government are, in this story, doing the necessary work of defense. The failure is the federal executives and the institutions around him that keep treating each escalation as another episode in a constitutional debate instead of what it is: an attempt to make the government answer upward to one man and downward to everyone else. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to AlterNet for today's article. With the automated voice of Riza, thanks for listening.